second. All right, good morning. I'm going to open the staff hearing officer meeting of October 4th, 2023. My name is Ellen Kokinda. I'm the staff hearing officer today. First, we're going to start with preliminary matters for any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items. And I do not have any to report today. And in terms of item B, announcements and appeals, I do have a quick announcement that this is just a small correction to a previously approved show resolution number 037-23 for the project at 2227 Cliff Drive to correct the owner name to Christina Rado. So that's just a administrative correction we will be making. And then now I don't have any other announcements. And I'm going to move on to item C, which is general public comment. So this is for items on the for any items not on today's agenda. If you would wish to approach the staff hearing officer, I do want to acknowledge that I received general public comment from Grant and Anne Marie Castleberg that I want to make sure that is included in the record in regards to development at 1730 Garden Street. So we will confirm that for the record. And is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on general public comment? Seeing none. And Ms. Gu, do we have anyone via Zoom who wishes to speak general public comment?
On checking Zoom, I do not see any raised hands. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close public comment. And we're going to move to our first item on today's agenda. This is 1630 Paterna Road. It's a 20,055 square foot site. It's currently developed with a 2,719 square foot two-story residence, a 608 square foot two-story accessory structure, a one-car garage with a guest unit above, circular driveway, landscape, and hardscape. The project consists of a proposal to construct a 700 square foot addition to the east elevation of the accessory structure. The accessory structure is non-conforming to the northern rear interior setback. An as-built outdoor retaining wall, counter, and fireplace encroaches into the eastern interior setback. The discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer today are an interior setback to allow an addition to the accessory structure to encroach into the northern interior setback, and an interior setback modification to allow the as-built retaining wall, counter, and fireplace to continue to encroach into the eastern interior setback. So staff has determined that this project qualifies for an exemption from further environmental review under sections 15301, existing facilities, and 15303, new construction or conversion of small structures regarding the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. Today we have Mrs. Burkhart here, Ms. Burkhart, to present for staff. So whenever you're ready, Ms. Gu, could you please switch over to the plans? And Ms. Burkhart, when you're ready, please go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Kokinda. Thank you for introducing the project. I'm going to start here. The site is located in the hillside. Let me scroll over to this photo here. And it slopes upward from the street. Let's see, how do I go back here?
Yeah, take your time. We all know this is awkward. And
if we only had paper
never
drawings.
judgment from me. And, if I was in your seat, I'd be doing the same thing. So,
thank you for your understanding. This is the site plan. It does slope upward from the street. There's existing residence and an existing garage with a little guest house above. Both of these elements are on the historic resources inventory. The project proposes an addition to this accessory structure just to create an exercise room downstairs and then a second bedroom for the guest house portion, just to make it more usable for today's standards. I can show you the floor plans here. Downstairs, this is the existing garage, and they would add an exercise room here with some exterior stairs going up to this newly constructed bedroom and patio area, and then there's a slight addition here as well, which allows them to reconfigure the interior of the existing portion. Also, as we were reviewing this project, we did notice that there is this kitchen. It's not really a kitchen. It's a fireplace and a countertop and a retaining wall that's outdoors. It does encroach into the interior setback. So we noticed that as part of our review. So they've added that to the project to try and correct that issue. So let me also show you some photos here. The site, you can see, is developed with some, in addition to the residence and the accessory structure, there's some outdoor areas that are developed. There's a bocce court, there's a trellis, there's some low walls and a fire pit, things like that. And here are some images from the street. And you can see up, this one I think is the best view. You can see up the driveway to that historic garage and guest house, which is what they would be adding to. There is a memo from our architectural historian, Ms. Hernandez. She is supportive of the project and found that it meets the Secretary of Interior standards. The project has been through concept review before Historic Landmarks Commission. They were supportive of the project. They had comments, positive comments as to the aesthetic appropriateness of the requested modifications. Especially, they stated that the location of the attachment to the accessory structure is appropriate in terms of historic standards, and also that the neighbor's testimony was persuasive. The neighbor to the north and to the east, adjacent, is the same person. He is supportive of both requests and has provided written confirmation of that, which is in your report. And as you discussed, staff has determined the project is exempt from CEQA. However, unfortunately, there's a couple alternatives that the applicant looked through, and I'll let them go into that in further detail, but they did consider pushing this addition further south so that it would not encroach into this setback. They considered constructing an entirely new detached structure, and they also considered constructing an addition to the residence, but deemed all of those options infeasible. And then alternatives to allowing this to continue, this fireplace countertop to continue in the interior setback would be, one, just to completely demolish it, or two, to just demolish and reconstruct it outside of the setbacks, which is not desirable for the applicant team. Unfortunately, staff is not supportive of either modification request. In terms of the northern interior request, staff feels that there are conforming options to construct outside of the setback. That would probably mean reconfiguring some of these other site improvements, but that doesn't preclude them from doing that. So staff believes the finding cannot be made that the requested encroachment is necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the lot. And in terms of the eastern interior setback, basically the same thing. Their staff feels there is room to reconstruct this outside of the setback, and that staff believes the finding cannot be made that the requested encroachment is necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the lot or to prevent unreasonable hardship. And additionally, approval of as-built work or unpermitted work is not typically supported when conforming options exist. So with that, I'll hand it over to the applicant team to give their presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Burkhardt. And if I can ask the applicant team to introduce yourselves for the record.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Anthony Grumbine with Harrison Design. Good morning.
Bill Hall
actually, I was
with
gonna see if
Harrison Design.
the owner could come up on up. Yeah.
Julia Kalila Carver, owner.
So maybe to begin with, we were we'll make it fairly quick. I don't see the timer going, so.
You know, I'm going to be watching you like a hawk. So.
the buzzer's gonna go when they're gonna cut us off.
Basically for me.
Anthony's never been known to go
No, I
over
don't think
time.
we've ever exceeded time for a show hearing, so
Yes,
I
there's
doubt
always a
you all will
first
be the
time.
first.
So we're going to ask the owner, our client, to just kind of give a little what this property is to them and what they're hoping to get out of this project, and their background story. So
So many, many years ago, more than 30, I did a graduate degree and lived in Santa Barbara and became really good friends with people who are still my best friends. Actually, one of them is the chief of the fire department, Chris Males, and Sonia. And I fell in love with the Riviera specifically, and over the years, I've visited it and come back and really confirmed my love for this particular area. And when I decided, okay, it was time and we could afford to move, my husband and I looked around and I called up a real estate agent and said, I'd like to live on these 3 streets.
That is very specific.
And they said, okay, nobody's ever called us up and said Mira Vista, La Swain, or Paterna. And I said, okay, and I would live on El Encanto Way if it was, absolutely necessary. And so it just so happened that I found this house, and the owner was a wonderful person that I'm now friends with, the previous owner. And I fell in love with it. I knew at the time, and we discussed in detail when we were negotiating, that the house was not big enough for our growing family. I have grown children who are now getting married and are married and having children of their own, and they have a lot of dogs too, which the house is not very big. It's kind of, it was sold as like a 4-bedroom, and it's not even a 3-bedroom. So it really isn't, when we have the whole family and their many dogs. It's difficult, and we want this to be our forever home. This is what we want. We considered when we sold our house in Woodside, Northern California, where we raised our children, and we're there for over 30 years, we considered selling this and buying a bigger. I'm madly in love with this property and my views and the peace that I have here. And my children are also, and we have to now go and get a hotel room for at least one of them, and we alternate which couple we get the hotel room for. We bought it with the pergola. The pergola is beautiful. At this point, it is a retaining wall because the lot behind it is never going to be developed because it's not a developable lot. It's just a little parcel. And it's a beautiful setting, but it really is something that we talked to the owner about, and she said, no, it's fine. The city did come out afterwards and talk to us about it, and they said, it's beautiful. Congratulations on your new home. You're good. And we had also talked to people with the city. We were quite thorough. We talked to the owner and other people about the guest house because we realized that we would eventually need to create more livable space. And when we did, we were told, you're far below the limit for the lot. The other alternative is the house. The house is beautiful the way it is. We don't need a big house. We don't want a big house. We're so happy, just the 2 of us and our 2 dogs living in the house. So this is the logical step. When our neighbor moved in, and he's become a very good friend of mine, and he's a lovely man who's alone and older, and he said, are you going to build a guest house in my sightline because I won't buy the property? And I said, well, we have no plans to do that. We don't want to ruin the harmony of the way it is right now, and I understand that if we moved anything, it would be right in the center. And he said, you're right in my sightline. That's my beautiful view. And I said, okay, well, I will promise you that we will try our hardest to keep the harmony the way it is. And he said, okay, I will do anything to help you because I love the properties the way it is. So that's my story. We're where we love our families growing, and we would like to stay at Paterna, but we do not have enough space for our growing family at this point. and it's costly to get hotels, especially now, and even the inexpensive ones we get for our kids. So that's kind of, it is costly on top of the property, so.
Yeah. So, and then I'll just jump in and talk about architecture.
Yes.
Yeah, and less about the dogs.
Okay,
Dogs drive architecture sometimes.
I got to meet the dogs yesterday,
happening.
so we have an affinity for dogs.
Yeah. So just in terms of the overall, our design, and this was part of our HLC presentation, but our design approach, and based on what Julia just said, was, and based on being sensitive to historic structures, both the house and the garage, chauffeur's quarters with the upstairs, was we could easily stay out of the setback and build forward here, but we thought that was, and HLC agreed that it was not a proper approach for the historic structure and not ideal, because then from the view from the main public right-of-way, you'd look up and the thing that you would see in front of the historic garage was this addition. And so we were trying to be as sensitive as possible to the historic structure, which meant that we really weren't coming forward any further than it is, maybe a couple inches and that's it. But just doing it in the most sensitive way possible and adding sideways as opposed to adding forward and staying out of the setback. So that was a sort of basic concept for the design approach. We felt very strongly that that was the right thing to do, and in this case, it meant building into the setback. But the other great thing was that the neighbor was very, very supportive of that and wanted us to stay close to the property line. And we had to do all the solar studies as well, and it's close, and we got it to work and keep all that good as well, because that's the northern property line. But we were able to kind of get that design to work, and the neighbor was super happy with it. So we're trying to make both the historic structure and the neighbor happy, and of course our client. So that's sort of how we ended up this size, and it's also, it's small, it's more modest than it needs to be, but we didn't want to affect the other already improvements that are on the property, including the pergola and the other structures, which then brings us to the fireplace. So this whole parcel here, the other aspect of it is it's also some sort of a creek or runoff, and there's all kinds of setbacks and everything else. So it's basically undevelopable, and the neighbor loves it that way too. So the fireplace,
The neighbor to the north
Oh,
also
sorry.
owns the parcel to the east.
Yeah, good point.
So has written in support of both the
Yeah.
addition to the guest house and the keeping the modification for the counter and fireplace to the east.
Yeah, that's a good point. So from our point of view, even if this wasn't constructed already, it would be, and here's our setback line, it would be detrimental, at least to a minor level, to be building it out here towards, because you're getting closer to the historic resources, and that's not as good to be seeing it all at the same time. But the other aspect was for the neighbor, because this is really their sight line, and they really like this, and that would be pulling the chimney and pulling those elements right into it, right into their sight line. So they really don't want that to be moved, and like it where it is, and this part of the land is really not developable. So in this case, it's not like it's building right next to someone else's backyard where they're having entertainment space and other things. It's really not a conflict of use. So So we felt it was very supportable here, and we would probably design it somewhere like there anyways if this was from scratch. So those were our reasonings that we gave to HLC, and they found they were supportable for both of those modifications for those reasons as well. So that's kind of our main gist of our arguments for both modifications
we're
and for
also limited
for
by the
design.
driveway.
Oh, yeah,
The driveway
that's
is
a good
probably
point.
one of the most limiting things.
Yeah.
It's a horseshoe, and there's no way to go backwards, and there's no way to go forwards and getting in and out of the garage or getting our cars up. It's almost, we've done it so many times, so that's a difficult thing too. I mean, it's hard enough as it is, but we would not be able to if we moved it up, or if we moved everything around, it would encroach on that driveway, which is quite large. It's not the greatest looking, but it is, at least it's usable, and
Yeah, and it's the original
it's
as
the way
well.
it's the way it
So
is.
it is, for this particular site is very challenging because it goes up and around, way up and around, and basically there's not a lot of other usable space here. The driveway does really lock everything in here.
And the house would be difficult to add on to if you look at it because of that driveway. What would we do?
Yeah, if you went sideways
have
this
to
way, you have to try to ring things around and get it all to work, come down and tear everything up. So it was, and it's the original driveway too, so.
It is. It's kind of cool. but-
Yeah. So those are our reasons why we would like 2 modifications, please.
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation. And if that concludes the presentation, I am going to open it up for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this particular item? Okay, see none. And do we have anyone attending via Zoom who wishes to speak?
On checking Zoom, I do not see any raised hands. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't receive any direct public comment, but I do understand from the staff report and also from the public comment that was received by HLC that that you have supportive comments from your neighbor to the north and who owns the property to the east as well. I think, so I do have questions, and thank you for the thorough presentation. I'm really curious, just considerations for, and this might be more of a staff question, but with an existing guest house and this proposed addition, was there an alternative such as an accessory dwelling unit that was explored as an just that has different zoning or development standards that would allow development like this? Oh, I'm sorry, can you come speak into a mic?
Sorry,
Yeah, we can get another chair. Here. We've got thousands of chairs.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Kokinda. Typically, yes, an addition to accommodate an ADU could be constructed and located 4 feet from that rear property line. However, this project is in the high fire hazard area, so they're not given that allowance, unfortunately.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
And the first like 4 months or 6 months of this project was looking into that.
Looking,
Trying to
figuring
figure
out,
out
let's
a
try to
way
figure
to try
this
to get
out.
the
Okay,
ADU.
yeah.
And
Okay.
they could do a detached ADU, brand new, separately, but
Yeah.
it could be 4 feet from the property line.
Okay.
Kind of in the same
And we looked
area.
at that in this area, but that would also, that was very much, the neighbor did not want to have that view impacted as well. He would way prefer us to stay tight to the existing structure, and then also it would be losing some of those improvements as well.
Okay. So can you walk me through the elevations along the rear lot line for the addition?
Sure. Oops, so those are the demos. There we go. Okay. So here's the side, here's the retaining wall up to the neighbor, and that's the kind of slope and step. And then the backside facing the neighbor is here, with this stair coming up here. So the wall would be along here, the retaining wall is right up against, or right next to, not up against. And then this is the front, facing the street frontage. This portion is the original 2-story garage below and the guest house above. And then this is a little connector piece addition, and then the slight pop up to the main portion, and the exercise room below and the bedroom above. So.
And you're not proposing any lighting on that northern elevation? Is that it's the door in the bottom, but which will likely require?
Yeah, this will require a lighting, and actually as we've been developing these plans a little more, yeah, we've incorporated, and there'll be a little lighting light here that adheres to, dark sky and everything else, and, but there'll be a little light here, and then there'll be a little light here for the
And on the
door.
northern elevation?
And then the northern elevation, there won't be any lighting here.
Okay.
Nope.
I just want to, that's always just a question. And then, again, I don't know if this is for staff or to you all as applicants, but is there a purpose for the retaining wall? Like, is it actually doing something, or is it really just aesthetic? Can you help me understand? And is the retaining wall simply what is shown in this image on A.2, or I couldn't tell when I was on my site visit if there's so much beautiful planting out there,
Yeah.
how far the retaining wall extends and to what is extent is as-built or what was, what's been there?
So I think this wall right here portion is retaining a few feet of dirt. So it is a step, I think it's at least a foot or two of dirt. So it's a minor retaining wall, but it is a retaining wall stepping from here down to here in terms of a slope.
Maybe a picture.
Yeah.
It's always been,
Yeah.
that was always.
Oh, right here.
Picture.
We'll go to, yeah, let's go to picture. All right, let's see.
Down towards the bottom.
Oops. Yeah, there we go. So there, it's here, this is probably 2 to 3 feet of dirt here it's being retained, and it continues here. So it's like a little step.
But in terms, in staff, can you help me understand what is the only part that really is concerning for the retaining wall is just the fact that it's as-built and it has not been permitted?
Correct. I don't think the
There's
retaining wall alone-
that retaining wall alone does not require any kind of modification
that would be
or minor
fine.
zoning exception or anything like that. I
Correct.
just want clarity,
Correct.
just want that.
Yeah, because I
To
think
be
it's under the
understood.
3 foot,
Right.
And, yeah,
so it's allowed to be.
it's outside of the front setback as well. It's fine. It's more the countertop and the fireplace that go along with it that is, it's as-built.
And Ms. Barker, are you able to, so I tried my best to understand the context of the neighboring lot, the vacant lot next door to the east. There's limitations to what one can do when you're only 5'8". And what is it is a parcel. It's an existing parcel. It is considered. So I'm just trying to understand if that's something that you looked into or have any understanding about, like what is the development potential? And
Sure.
I understand it's very much non-conforming to lot size. It's a 39% slope. I do see projects that have extreme circumstances with really odd constrained parcels. So I'm just curious if you looked into that at all.
Sure, we did look at that a little bit. It's not completely undevelopable. It would just be more of a challenge. It is steep. There's a creek, I believe, that runs through it. The current owner doesn't have any plans to develop it, although, it's not outside of the realm of possibility that it could be developed, but it would be difficult, and the current owner has no intention of doing so.
And I wasn't quite, so this had an enforcement case, I think in 2019, and it sounded like it was with a prior owner, perhaps. I'm not sure when you
Right.
purchased the property. And it wasn't clear to me why that enforcement case is closed, because oftentimes if there's a change in ownership, we would close the case but then reopen a new one. So perhaps it was just because this development was being proposed and you all were gonna address it. But technically, any alteration to this would require HLC review and approval. And so I'm just curious if there's any clarification on why that enforcement case was closed.
Sure, I can explain that. So the reason it was open in the first place, someone called in and reported active construction taking place in a setback. And enforcement went out there and took a look and found there was no active construction happening on site. And so they closed the enforcement case. They really did not look at, I believe at that time, this element, this countertop and fireplace was already there, but what they were looking for was something currently under construction, and there was nothing like that.
So they weren't able to verify that was as-built work at that time?
Right,
Okay.
that's really not what they were there for. They were looking
Yeah,
for
they were
active
looking
construction,
specifically
and
for
there was none.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just a little bit confused as to the disconnect between our processes with planning and enforcement. Okay. So we really don't have the fireplace has been there for a while, it sounds like. So I'm going to kind of move into my comments, and let's just start with the proposed addition. So I see,
Do you want to be looking at any?
the site plan is fine. So I disagree with staff's assessment on the proposed addition for the guest house. And for many of the reasons that have previously been identified. So generally, it is the case that if there are conforming options, we always want people, we try to lead people to those options. In this case, the reason why I can support that there are site constraints or that, this is a necessary to secure an appropriate improvement is because this is a historic site. You have a historic residence. There are aspects about the site, including the horseshoe driveway, that if you started pulling things out, it would start to interrupt that character of the residence and the parcel in and of itself. So yes, moving it further south would address the zoning issue and the development standard that we have. But I do see how that could present, again, just like more of a visual impact. Subtle, but, you're trying to address your own desires, your neighbor's wishes, and trying to work with your neighbor, which I very much appreciate. And then also recognize what is the character of this residence and this historic home. So I am supportive of that northern setback and that kind of and don't think it's going to be an impact given the slope of the lot in the rear and that it is more demure in its design, and it's beautifully designed. You have a lovely lot. And that I don't necessarily see any privacy or lighting nuisance issues either with that proposed addition. So I can go ahead and make the finding for the interior setback modification to allow the addition to the accessory structure to encroach in the northern interior setback. And with the reasons, again, this is trying to preserve the existing character of the home. I think it would be unfortunate if there were a big addition to the home. You could certainly, people do this to historic residences all of the time to put things in the rear to kind of, not necessarily impact. But I do think it's a benefit, and it sounds like it meets more of the needs of your intention to be able to have a guest space. And kind of maintaining the residence as it is. So I see this as a benefit to that, and that you're not kind of moving it out closer towards the public right-of-way, which would, again, kind of take away from what your stance when you're standing at the end of the driveway looking towards the house and the rear, the historic garage and second floor of the guest house. So I'll be making the findings for that. I have to say that I really am struggling to make the findings for the eastern setback modification. And what's so difficult is that I did do a site visit and I read HLC's comments. And your home is beautiful and the site is beautiful and everything looks perfect. And that's what's really difficult, but it's really challenging for, I just had to imagine, if this were coming in brand new, would I allow a fireplace in this area? It's a fireplace and a sink. The retaining wall itself is not problematic, so if there's a need for that, I don't see, I'm supportive of a retaining wall, but I can't make the necessary findings about hardship because to me, there are multiple other spaces on site that might not necessarily support that specific fireplace because it's really tall element, but that could support a beautiful fireplace and again, kind of create a warmth. And you have multiple areas that have that kind of characteristic that, I can understand why you want to live here. But it puts staff in a really difficult position to try to go back and approve as-built work because I believe there are conforming options and it's just not necessarily, it's difficult because again, it looks perfect. But
Could I ask
I know
a
that,
question?
so let me just keep going
Okay,
through
sure.
and then I will, I'm happy to hear you out. So One of the other considerations is that I know you have your neighbors' support in both areas. And again, I'm really pleased. It's always pleasing for me to hear that you've worked with your neighbor. And again, that's why I can support the northern interior setback. But any land use decision, it sticks with the land. It doesn't stick with the owner. So that's just a discrepancy that I like to point out. And we recognize the neighboring parcel to the east as an existing parcel that, despite a billion challenges, and I would never want to propose a project on that site, given the setback requirements and the creek and the 39% slope that I understand it is, it's still technically developable. And I know that this particular owner has no intention of doing anything, and that it could stay like that for the next generation or two. But that's just another reason, if this project came in today, I would not, it's just a matter of the scale of the fireplace, and the potential for activity. We try to bring that stuff in a little bit. And again, it seems like there's plenty of room on the edge of the trellis that would be outside of the setback that could support a fireplace. Again, just as staff noted, conforming options. So that's kind of my thinking. And it's really hard for me to say that again, because I want to figure out like, what if there are certain pieces or aspects of that I would, the things that are bothering me the most about it, it's not the retaining wall, it's the sink and the fire and the scale of the fireplace and that location there. So, Mr. Grumbine.
Okay. I it totally makes sense, and I appreciate the understanding of the thought process. Is there, so this is, and this, I definitely agree, I definitely would say that this is a very unique situation for most properties that we deal with, because normally you have this neighbor who's screaming to get this torn down, and this neighbor who doesn't want you building a two-story and doesn't want it close to their property. So it is a very odd situation in that sense. But is there argument? So I guess there was two argumentations. One was on the historic side. And I think it's an argument. I don't think it's the strongest argument, but it at least is something that, and I think HLC agreed with it, was that the further you build bigger structures away from historic buildings, the better, as a sort of a general rule. And this is pretty big of a structure. I know that there's other structures there along the way, but this is a pretty large structure comparatively. And so pushing it away from the historic, both historic elements is a benefit. But I think it's an argument, it's a weaker argument, I get it, but it at least has something. But then the other aspect is, with the neighbor owning both and wanting it out of their way there, it seems like if this was later developed as its own parcel, then when they buy it, they're buying it with this condition, knowing that there's a fireplace right there where people hang out, and just from the design aspect, it's sort of like buying something here where there's a existing garage built up against that is legal non-conforming or whatever, but it's just part of that site and the thing that you design with. And in addition to that, if we did take this down and move it over, we can move it over right here, which is basically the same location. It's 10 feet, 5 feet over. But it's in the same location, but the only problem is, we did look at that initially. I actually looked at tearing down the pergola too. They're Tuscan columns, but they're not just right. I would do them differently. We would do them differently.
Mr. Ideas, I know.
So they were minorly offensive, but not so much. My compromise was just growing the vines heavier over them, so we didn't have to look at them. But with that, even if we did move it forward here, which would be totally legal outside of the setback, it's actually right in the neighbor's view, and that's part of the reason they specifically in their letter talked about this, and they're like, they don't want that moving over, because now you can have that, and they could build a larger fireplace there or whatever, the whole thing there, but it's actually right now kind of tucked out and behind what they can enjoy. And I know that's just more of a reason to have an exception, but that also, even if they don't develop it, the person buying it would also know that already, that just like this person that already this exists and you're going to design with it as opposed to.
There's another side to this.
And I'm so sorry, it's for
Yeah,
city
sorry,
TV's
this is-
purpose, and
Yeah.
if you would like to come up, I just need you to speak in front of the mic. I can still hear you, but it's for our recording.
There's another aspect to it, which is, well, there are two, actually, because we've been beating this horse for a long time. And that is, especially when people came, when your office came before to talk to us, and we discussed what we would do about it. And one is, when they did the site drawings, because there hadn't been for so long, and because the Riviera is so oddly drawn, the guy that came out said he's been doing it for years, and Jay had the same, that's my neighbor, he had the same issue, which is the property lines are ish, and they're literally, that's what they put, ish, because they're about. It's not
About.
even, and Jay even came to me and he said, well, this.
It was the first time in a legal description that I saw the words more or
Ish.
less.
Ish. This
So
is where it
20
is,
feet, more or
ish. And
less.
so I was kind of like, okay, we'll move it over this ish. And so, and then there's another aspect of it where it wraps around. And Jay came and he said, well, is that yours or mine? And I go, it's not, it's ish. Like, it's, if you'd like to do something to help me, we'll, if you want that, I don't care, plant it. So that's why he's actually planted a lot of the plantings, because we're kind of unclear. And that structure has been there for so long that if it's removed, and you can go look, the roots and the trees around it are very embedded. We will completely, it's going to collapse, the landscape. So it's going to be a bigger expense to us and to him. And we will never use the fireplace as a fireplace. That's why it's filled with stuff, because I don't like fireplaces, because it's my own paranoia. I will never use it as a fireplace. I'm perfectly happy to take all of the gas out of it or whatever. And the sink is, if I'm correct, is not in the setback. So the sink is not part of what is in the setback. It's only the fireplace, and it's just 5 feet of it.
Ms. Burkhart, can you verify?
Can we look at the drawings of the?
And here,
Can't remember off the
take a
top of
chair.
my head.
Because the sink is way over there. It's not even close to the property line.
The sink is in this.
Oh, I think.
Setback lines.
Oh, the setback
The
there.
sink
Yeah.
is in the setback.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, the
so-
grill is not.
The grill is not, okay. Well, I don't even care about the sink either.
And we can ditch the sink.
It's easy to ditch the sink. I mean, and make that just a retaining wall. I just want the look of I like the look of the beautiful fireplace, because it looks like it's very authentic looking without the posts on the trellis.
Do you think that changes staff, if it's non-functioning, how does that change staff's opinion on it?
I don't think it does, honestly.
I don't think it would change from a zoning point of view. I don't think it would change the call.
So I think, again, I'm just I really don't want to touch any bit of this. And I just it would be lovely to leave it there. And I guess maybe a little bit more from Mr. Gumbine or Mr. Hull about, again, the structural needs of the retaining wall. The challenge for me about the design is that if the fireplace were taken down, or if some kind of retaining wall was to be maintained, I would just imagine that you wouldn't design the same scale of a fireplace somewhere else on site, that you would end up doing something smaller. So I don't necessarily see the removal of the one necessarily being planted somewhere else on site.
So to that, I think in general, for a draw, you need it at least 12, 14 feet. So size-wise, you're going to have a large chimney, one way or the other.
I guess I'm
Yeah.
thinking more of chimney. If you want the vibe, it's very different from a big structure, like a chimney versus, just a little fire pit type element.
Yeah, and I would say it is an appropriate, while we would probably have done it slightly different in terms of refinement of it, it is an appropriate, let's see, let's go into here. It is an appropriate design for the house as a Mediterranean, as a Mediterranean fireplace, having something of this size, plaster and stone, and sort of as a main element would be pretty appropriate in terms of, you wouldn't really do anything smaller than this or of different materials. Plaster, and the house is plaster and wood. You wouldn't do wood on the fireplace, so you do plaster or plaster and stone. So I think element-wise, this is probably the right general size, scale, material of element for wherever you do a fireplace, and height as well. And so I think visual impact-wise, it is more of a matter of taking that and moving it. Now, you could do something slightly different here, and then you had asked about the retaining wall. Yes, I think that, and I forgot about the roots thing too. I think that is both the plantings around would be affected. I know it's an as-built condition, but it's also a condition of the reality of what has happened over time. But then also the retaining wall, you definitely need a retaining wall there of some sort to get that to work. So you're basically for sure going to have a wall here, and then depending on how this is laid out, you might still have a part of the wall there, within that setback. Yeah.
What is the height of the chimney?
So let's go to our drawings. See if, whoops. So total height is 1311. And the plaster is going up to here, so it's probably going up to about 10 or 10.6. And then the spark arrestor is the upper cap in metal. So that's pretty typical for having a draw, like being able to have the smoke go up and clear.
And what would it be to decommission the fireplace? It sounds like it's gas. What kind of impact would that have to the structure?
I think you could, I guess you could decommission it via the gas and cut it off, and that's easy enough. Cut it off and stub it out. In terms of decommissioning the entire fireplace, I guess you could somehow enclose it so the flue function didn't work. And then it wouldn't be a working fireplace. It would just be a plaster decorative feature.
I have a question maybe for Ms. Burkhart. In situations like this in the past where there's a structure in like a side setback or something like that, sometimes the path forward has been to make a concession within the site of like kind of an equal, like basically the piece of the setback and then your sacrifice like above it, either north or south, you eat into the buildable footage so that, and sometimes we've worked with planning to do something like that where there's an equivalent concession of like whatever is given into the setback. Is there anything like that you can think of that would be?
As sort of a variable setback?
Yeah, I think that's the term usually, the variable setback.
Yeah, I'm unaware of anything like that personally, haven't come across that. I think the issue is making the findings that it's an appropriate improvement and that there is a hardship, and those are hard for us as staff. We were unable to get there, unfortunately.
So then maybe the last, sounding like where this is going, we'll make the last ditch effort of the historic side of things, because it is the furthest away from the structures in a way that is it keeps it out of sight, and especially when you're actually looking from the street. That view, and whether that starts to come into that view or not and starts to become a competing structure, is at least something in terms of it would be the place that we try to screen from and try to do in the least offensive way or at least impactful way, which I think that was at least part of what HLC had findings for.
All right, hang on just a second. So I can, again, the way that I think about it, the decision runs with the land. And my biggest concern is, despite nothing's happening next door, is how would this impact? What are the annoyances? What's the noise? What's the activity level? What's happening? I hear the arguments. I do believe that an alternative would be to not have the same chimney-like element, and you have chimney as fire pits elsewhere that this site can completely support. But I'm willing to accept the design with the caveat, with the condition that the fireplace be decommissioned, that it's really an architectural element.
Blame you.
And that it's not, and the same goes for the sink, but I, you know, and that's because that it's encouraging an activity, and I don't want there to be smoke. I don't want, in terms of a wood fireplace burning, a gas fireplace, that would all need to be decommissioned. And that would be conditioned on the allowance to keep the structure, the retaining wall, the chimney, and the counter, but again, the counterpoint is that the sink would also need to be removed. And that way, it's not, again, it really puts staff and myself in a difficult, the staff hearing officer in a difficult position to have as-built work, and I know this was not your doing, and that
Part
you
of the reason we
inherited,
bought the house was
you
because of
inherited
this.
this, and that's often the case when there's real estate transactions. But I can make the finding that it's an appropriate improvement, given the one, that it's not to be maintained as a space for the same level of activity, and that the main seating area is closer to the trellis, these other kind of layered areas, that it won't be used for any kind of smoke or nuisance. That is part of, when we craft a condition, when I draft the actual condition, I'll need to have specific language in there about capping the gas and all. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And that I can get there because of the need for a retaining wall in the potential disruption to the site related to all the flora and trees and items over there. So I can get there, and that is also tied into the historic piece of not necessarily doing things elsewhere, but this is not an easy decision to make, and I hope that's an understandable concession for what we're trying to do here. And so, I will make those findings today, and we'll also direct staff that what you said regarding this particular element was very much an appropriate opinion. So we will, it's very specific to this site and related to deactivating those particular items. Okay.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
sorry, that was a long one. So maybe you do win for probably the longest project. So I do want to just acknowledge that any of my decisions that are made have a 10 calendar day appeal process. So anyone wishing to appeal the decision can do so within that time frame. Anyone from the Planning Commission, should they see fit, can also pull my decision within that 10 calendar day time period as well. So good luck with your project. Good luck going back to HLC. And thank you for talking this out with me.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. We're going to transition to the next project. I have a proposal to construct, this is a project at 2944 Valencia Drive. It's a proposal to construct a new 1,742 square foot, two-story single-unit residence with an 85 square foot balcony over the foundation of the previous residence. The project includes a detached 341 square foot accessory dwelling unit in the same footprint as the previous garage. Required parking for the residents is proposed in a tandem configuration within a new permeable paver driveway. The discretionary applications under the jurisdiction of the staff hearing officer at this hearing are a front setback modification to allow the residents to have a 15-foot front setback rather than the required 20-foot setback, an open yard modification to allow a 1,146 square feet of open yard rather than the required 1,250 square feet of open yard, an interior setback modification to allow the required parking for the residents to be in the driveway, partially encroaching in the required 6-foot interior setback, an uncovered parking modification to grant relief from the parking standards to allow 2 uncovered spaces for the residents rather than the 2 covered spaces. And then staff has determined that this project qualifies for an exemption from further environmental review under Section 15303, new construction or conversion of small structures related to the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines. Okay, oops, sorry. So we have Ms. Plummer here who is presenting this project. And whenever you're ready, were you able to find the plans? Okay, Ms. Gu, can you switch over, please?
Good morning. Thank you, Ms. Kokinda, for that introduction. I'm Pilar Plummer, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara, and I'll be doing the staff presentation for this project. I'm joined by the architect and owner of the property. So this is a bit of an interesting project. As a bit of background, before I cover the modifications that are being requested, this project was originally reviewed as a design review only project for improvements to an existing single-family residence. The existing residence that was reviewed is approximately 857 square feet. It was quite small. And the site is also developed with an existing single-car garage. As part of that project that was reviewed by the Single Family Design Board, the architect and homeowner were proposing a second-story addition. So I'll just show you the elevations for context. So as I said, the project involved a second-story addition to the residence, also a balcony facing the rear yard. And the proposal involved with the second story, did push the upper story back to meet the required front setback, which I'll be discussing in a little bit more detail in a moment. Also, as part of that project, the SFDB reviewed the conversion of the existing garage to an accessory dwelling unit, which is allowed for single-unit residential properties in the city of Santa Barbara. So going back to the site plan. There are 4 modifications being requested. Once this project was approved by the Single Family Design Board in September of 2022, a building permit was issued for that project. And at that time, substantial redevelopment occurred, and just for benefit of the public. So what that means is the existing residence and actually all on-site structures were demolished. So for our purposes, any situation where there's non-conformities to the site, such as setback encroachments or reduced parking, less than what is required for this type of development, if there's reduced open yard existing on the property, any level of non-conformities are removed once substantial redevelopment occurs. So in this case, what that means is that the existing residence, which already had a 15-foot setback encroachment in the front yard, so it's actually a 5-foot encroachment, so they had a 15-foot setback from the property line, that was no longer allowed to remain. The existing garage, as I said, was a single-car garage, and because of substantial redevelopment, the requirement is now to provide 2 covered parking spaces. They're not allowed to just keep 1. And then the existing open yard at the back of the property is 1,146 square feet, rather than the required 1,250 square feet that's required for this type of property. So following substantial redevelopment, the applicant owner reached out to the city to pursue modifications to allow the existing conditions on site. And staff did review all the requested modifications and did find them all to be supportable, and I'll discuss why. So to start with, this is a slightly undersized lot for the zoning district that it's located in. Generally, lots of this zoning district and land use designation are 7,500 square feet. This property is 5,026 square feet approximately. So it is a bit undersized, and you can see just by the overall layout of the property, you know, there's not a lot of area to accommodate, for example, a new garage. They're proposing to do a accessory dwelling unit here, which is again allowed per ordinance, but the ability to provide 2 covered spaces in addition to that structure is just not feasible. Additionally, this is quite modest residence in terms of square footage. As I said, their original was 857 square feet, and they're proposing 1,742 square feet, which, you know, again, for the neighborhood, this was reviewed by the Single Family Design Board and approved as such, and then re-reviewed earlier, just recently in September of this year, for neighborhood compatibility and aesthetic appropriateness of all the requested modifications, and was supported by the Single Family Design Board staff as they originally approved it. They did find it to be aesthetically appropriate, as I said. Additionally, at least in terms of the front setback modification request, as I noted and I showed in the elevation, the piece that's located in the front setback is remaining at 1 story as it was originally approved as when it was originally constructed. So the only portion of the 2nd story that slightly encroaches is a bit of the roof eave, but this portion is centrally located. It's separated from this property by the driveway and from this as well. So there's not a lot of concerns as far as noise or privacy issues related to that bedroom. And again, it's remaining 1 story. If they were to push the building back to meet the 20-foot setback, that would further reduce their already non-conforming situation of open yard at the back, which is 1,146 square feet. And I do want to note that the requirement for open yard for properties varies dependent on lot size. So lots that are less than 5,000 square feet are only required to provide 800 square feet of open yard, not 1,250. This property is just slightly over 5,000 square feet at 5,026. So they're just over it. And overall, the intent of open yard is to provide a breakup of building mass on a property so you're not overdeveloping this site. And it allows for areas for outdoor enjoyment. And that's entirely what's being proposed for this back area. Regarding parking, so as I said, there's not really the ability without making substantial changes to the project that was originally approved and received support from the neighborhood as well. We haven't had any concerned comments about the project and requested encroachment from neighbors. But again, without making substantial changes, they can't accommodate a 2-car garage. So the alternative was to provide 2 uncovered tandem spaces in the driveway. Staff is supportive of this for several reasons. One, because under the original project, and typically for ADUs, when you have an existing accessory building, such as a garage converted to an ADU, there are some allowances that an owner can pursue to provide optional replacement parking, such as using an existing driveway to provide uncovered parking spaces, which is essentially what they're intending to do. It would be in the location of the pre-existing driveway. The spaces are also assigned to the primary residence, so they're assigned to 1 unit and received full support from Transportation Division because they are meeting city requirements and again assigned to the 1 unit. And in terms of noise and privacy issues, again, because that use generally is just you're parking your car and you're going into your house. It's not intended to, be an area where people are occupying that. There wasn't really any concerns related to that. And lastly, just to touch on, they are proposing a gate, so they are going to be screened from the public right-of-way. That essentially concludes my presentation. I do want to note there are some pieces here in the setback. Those were all reviewed. They're allowed encroachments. And yeah, I'll turn it over to the applicant if he has anything to add. We also have photos too. And yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Plummer.
Great, thank you. I'm Greg Jenkins, the architect, and Melinda Green is the owner. We appreciate staff support for these modification requests. A little bit of history, as was said, we didn't have previously received design review approval. A building permit was issued, and then through unfortunate circumstances, which started to occur during construction, we're thrown into substantial redevelopment. So everything, the irony is if you approve these modifications, everything has previously been approved. And so we're not proposing to make any changes. The only deviation is that the driveway will go to permeable pavers instead of previously impervious ones. So I wish, we attempted in the very beginning, talking with the director, if there was a less onerous process to address this very unfortunate set of circumstances. And it appeared at the time that there was not. Just my own narrative, it would be helpful in the future, I think, taking less staff time, certainly less impact to the owner, if there may be a different venue for a unique circumstances like what has occurred here. So that's just a side note. But we're here to answer any questions you may have. There is a lot of family history related to this site, and multi-generational that perhaps the owner might want to speak to, but we know that the design has already been approved. It's going to be an enhancement to the neighborhood. Size, bulk, and scale is compatible. Speaking to the front yard setback, it was legal, non-conforming at the time. That foundation still exists. We're attempting to build on that existing foundation. To make any deviations to this approved design is a hardship to my client because we have a completed set of working drawings. We have, structure has been addressed, energy has been addressed, you name it. And so we were starting construction. And so here we are. So I'll turn it over to the owner.
Hi, my name is Melinda Green. I've lived at the residence since 1993 full-time. We've had 4 generations, my son's being the 4th generation to live in this house. I'm simply out of space. They're both taller than me. I need the space. Sharing 1 bathroom and 850 square feet is just not reasonable at this point of my family. I have an elderly parent that I need to consider, which is why we need the ADU. So I've been very communicative with all of my neighbors, and you can see at the back of the room I have quite the support. This isn't just a house. This is my family. I'm not just friends with people. These are my family members. I know at least 30 families in the neighborhood. I walk their dogs. I bring them soup when they're sick. If I don't get these modifications, I can't build the house. This has been a financial hardship, what has happened. Every month that ticks by, it digs into the additional cost, and the cost of this hardship is very substantial to me, and I'm going to have to make a lot of modifications to the finishes to even build this project. I really need the support
and expedited processing through the building process.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Jenkins, and I'm assuming, does that conclude your comments?
Yes, it does. I'm here to
Okay,
answer any
thank you.
questions too.
All right, so I'm going to open it up to public comment. I just want to acknowledge for the record that I did receive an email from John Patton that was distributed to me prior to this hearing, so that will be included in the record. And then I would like to open it up for anyone in the audience. I'm going to call up Joy Bronson, if you'd like to come up to the podium. And there's a little button on the microphone, and it'll light up green. If you don't mind introducing yourself for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And Ms. Scoot, do you mind swapping screens for me? So whenever you're ready, Ms. Bronson.
Okay, hi, I'm Joy Bronson. My husband Joe Scarupa and I live directly across the street from Melinda, so directly to the south. Our front windows look right at her property. Greg Jenkins rebuilt our house. It's beautifully done. And I just want to speak in support of getting this project moved forward. You know, Melinda's not asking for anything different than was previously approved. And the modification to the front yard has no effect on us. We love the plans. We've been looking at the fallow construction for months, and every month, as Melinda said, ticks by, and she's paying for a rental property, or kids aren't living in their home or in the neighborhood. And it's in the best interest of everyone, not just her family, but the whole neighborhood. We miss them, you know, to move this forward as expeditiously as possible with all of the modifications approved.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak? If you wouldn't mind coming up, and we will need you to fill out a speaker slip, but if you'd like, but you can do that after you speak, so. And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Patricia. I live next door to Melinda. My kitchen window looks through the hedge to her living room, and I'm hopeful that that will be the same when the construction is finished. I want to just support not only the construction itself, but the necessity for expediting this, given the financial cost and the stress surrounding this. As Joyce says, we miss not having her on the block. We are all very grateful to have each other, having myself live next door to her for over 30 years. So I'm happy to get them back and to try to move forward after this unfortunate detour. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Yes, and if you wouldn't mind filling out that speaker slip for us so we can include it in the records. Anyone else wishing to speak? Do we have anyone via Zoom who wishes to comment?
I'm looking on Zoom and I do not see any raised hands. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else in the audience, but we will make sure that we have those items included in the record. And Ms. Gu, do you mind going back to the plans, please? So you might have already addressed this, Mr. Jenkins, but you're not planning on modifying any of the design at this time. It's really it's the same. I understand it to be the same project that's been approved. You're not proposing any changes from here, which will, again, I'm hoping to expedite your process moving forward. I've reviewed this project. I'm familiar with this project, and when it first came to my attention and looking at it from a design review standpoint and kind of trying to provide some information of what could happen, this is just a really unfortunate circumstance, and I'm really sorry, and it's been a really difficult road financially, emotionally. You've got a beautiful project here. You have a small home that, as you mentioned, isn't meeting your needs. This has been part of your family's history living here in this neighborhood, and just to think about what are someone's options for what you can do, and understanding that you're taking something and trying to make it work for you in the long run, and I know that I just want to clarify for the public that the unfortunate circumstance really kind of like related to the substantial redevelopment or the total demolition, which was not something that everybody's walking around with understanding when they're working on a building project or have an issued building permit. So in spite of the sheer number of modifications that need approval, this is a perfectly acceptable project. And like I said, it's a beautiful project, will be a beautiful benefit to your neighborhood. And I hope that you'll be able to finish it, get through it, and have it meet all of your needs. Again, everything about this has already been vetted by the Single Family Design Board. I understand if there are no changes, that once you get your land use approval, you will be able to qualify for an administrative approval at SFDB, which requires no additional hearings, and that you already have an issued building permit, and that you will be able to carry on the work that you need to do to be able to move forward. So again, staff did a very thorough job. Your open yard modification is so incredibly minor to get you close to the required 1250. This is a relatively small lot. You're trying to create an accessory dwelling unit and converting a garage, which is perfectly acceptable. The parking has been vetted by transportation staff, and it's all supportable in the type of design, and you're not trying to propose anything that would further either reduce your open yard in the rear or just to try to achieve some other kind of design element. I'm happy that you came here with all 4 modifications, although again, it's kind of a lot to request. This is a perfectly acceptable design and will fit very much into the existing neighborhood. So I completely agree with staff's assessment. And again, I just want to apologize for the hardship that you've had. And it really comes down to, we love to try to be reasonable, come up with certain things. We have our zoning ordinance that is in place. That's literally the law of the land and how we interpret it. So in this situation, it was just completely unfortunate how this impacted your project. And it is to safeguard other things where substantial redevelopment, we have to look at things. So it's kind of applied consistently, and it just doesn't seem fair at all times, given what you were trying to accomplish. So hopefully, again, I think with an administrative design review process moving on from here, I can make all of the findings as Ms. Plummer drafted in her staff report for each one of the modifications. So I'm supportive of the front setback modification, the open yard modification, and the parking and interior setback modifications, and can also qualify that this project is further exempt from environmental review. And of course, there are no conditions to that, to any of my decisions, and it will be drafted just as written here in terms of supportability. And my decision is an appealable action within 10 calendar days, or any one member of the Planning Commission could pull my decision at that time. And Mr. Jenkins.
Yes, I do have just one question or clarification. You made reference to the fact that we already have an issued building permit.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Forgive me if that was incorrect. I thought you had an existing demolition permit.
Well, no, we have an issued building permit for the previous work.
Right. Ms. Plummer, can you maybe I misspoke, so can you clarify?
Thank you, Ms. Gokinda. So to clarify, that permit was for a remodel of the residence and second-story addition. So
I see.
This is a permit for
It will need to
substantial
be-
redevelopment and for the ADU. But
Thank you.
yes.
Okay, so in terms of what will happen next steps, the building and safety will guide you in terms of how you will need to manage your permits, but for scope of work will be very different from what was originally proposed. So
Well-
again,
That's the irony, is that there is no scope of work change. It's exactly the same.
and that is why this is a zoning issue. It's a municipal code
Right.
zoning and land use issue.
Right.
And so that's the distinguishing factor, which makes it so, why there's so much heartache over kind of the what happened. So that's, and we understand that. And again, it's not we have this in the zoning ordinance to protect things. This is a circumstance where it's absolutely painful to see. So, so that is my decision. And Ms. Green, again, thank you for being able to work with us, and Mr. Jenkins, and I just wish you well, and I hope you can move through quickly and steadily, and be able to get your needed building permits and finalize your project. Thank you so much. And that concludes today's staff hearing officer meeting for October 4th, 2023. And we will adjourn. Thank you.